Joe Biden totally effed us. That, a quote from a Kamala Harris official in a new book that paints a damning picture of how far the White House went to hide his decline. Among the revelations from Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson's book, Biden's team hid him from his staff and even members of his cabinet. They considered that he may need a wheelchair in the future and contradicted warnings from his doctor. And Biden didn't recognize George Clooney, one of his longtime supporters, and of course, one of the most famous movie stars and faces on the planet. But as the scandal branches grow, what about the people who have political runways, the Pete Buttigiegs of the world, hitting a Midwest tour, Kamala Harris thinking about a run for California governor? Will and should their futures be impacted by this scandal? It kind of seems like the answer has to be yes, right?
Well, wait a minute.
Especially for someone like Kamala Harris who's in the White House.
Every Democrat's rushing to say, oh my gosh, Joe Biden wasn't fit to run for re-election. But they let him stay in running the country for another 5 months. It's complete hypocrisy to say, yes, we think he wasn't fit, but it was okay that policy continued to be made, and we didn't ask him to step down.
It's tragic for the Democratic Party to have let him go on so long when clearly people around him knew that there was a serious problem. The people closest to him had been close to him for years, most of them like 20 years, so they were super loyal to him, more than normal analysts, activists who come and go. I don't know that I retain, as a Democrat, if I retain being a Democrat, if I'm mad at Pete Buttigieg because he didn't waive. Am I mad at Kamala? I would not think it would be her responsibility to say, you're not. Now, might she say something privately? Yeah, but I would not expect her to publicly.
But I guess
that's what the 25th Amendment's all about,
you
though.
So much, but like, because you're left-leaning. I'm talking about the average American. When they ask the question, what did you know and when did you know it?
Right.
Yeah. Right? And I think one of the things that is in the excerpts from this book is this idea that it wasn't just that Kamala Harris only had 100+ days to run, but that the idea that Americans felt like they were being deceived by the Democratic Party, it tainted her in that last election already.
She did the deceiving. She said
well,
he
I
was
think
sharp
that this
as
is
a
the
tack.
question.
Well,
I mean, how does she escape that?
This was something where I think the public was ahead of where the politicians and even to some degree the media was. 2 years before the disastrous debate, we were sitting there together, Abby. There were polls that were showing 67% of Americans thought Joe Biden was too old to have another term. And Democratic politicians did not listen to those warnings. And I interviewed Joe Biden a week and a half ago on The View. I left thinking he definitely could not have done another 4 years. I'm grateful for his service. He had a good command of the facts of things he was proud of to talk about that he did, but there was just no way that Joe Biden could do 4 more years. And I do think the future leaders of the party have to say something better than it's time to look forward. They need to address that the public was saying we need someone else, and they waited until the last minute and frankly did not have a particularly democratic process. Can I ask one quick
question, Melissa, about that interview? I mean, what did you make of the fact that Jill Biden was there with him?
I thought it was very unhelpful. I asked the specific question about allegations of his cognitive decline, and he began to answer it, and then she jumped in for him. And I get it, as a spouse, you want to help your partner, but that was his moment to knock out of the park any fear that he has cognitive decline, and it played into basically the worst assumptions, that he can't finish sentences and she had to help him out.
I think Democrats have to start doing what these two things right here, start listening a little bit more, because Representative Dean Phillips went on a tour in November, October. He went on Pod Save America, where all David Plouffe and all these folks went to complain about how they didn't have enough time. And they didn't listen to Dean Phillips and others that were warning about Joe Biden was not in the best position to lead the party to beat Donald Trump. Back to your data point. There was polling that showed we didn't want a rematch. You and I did Super Tuesday. We were talking about this, like, America doesn't even want a rematch. It was like 67% of Americans don't want a rematch. Going back to the journalistic angle where I come from this, you know, we did this on the show recently where a lot of segments, when we were listening back to KJP press conferences, a lot of the questions were focused on. Press secretary, thank you. We were doing a lot, she was taking a lot of questions about how voters feel about Joe Biden's age. Yeah. But that's not the questions. The questions, again, back to this journalist part of framing questions. The man fell off a bike. The man gave a terrible debate performance and looked like he was completely out of it. 2020, he does an interview with CBS News and he looks incredibly cogent and he looks like he's there. And now what we're seeing is a frail old man, right? And so, like, there's got to be something timeline-wise that we continue to ask, what is being hidden? So now that the book is coming out, and again, Jake's coming on my show, so I'm going to ask him about this, but something's curious about it. It's different than what I'm talking about with the Democratic Party.
Mike, I think you're right, though.
Everybody knows older people who, again, it's a good day, bad day kind of situation.
Right.
I think that's part of the difficulty of this story.
But the 25th Amendment's there so that the bad days, you don't accept them. And we don't let someone stay in the job who has the days that are that bad. I think Mike's right, though. Dean Phillips is owed a big apology.
Huge.
And that's something that's missing in this analysis by Democrats, this autopsy. No one's saying we should have listened to Dean Phillips. And the reason they didn't listen to Dean Phillips, who was a member of the Democratic leadership, who'd won in a tough suburban district,
Correct.
who was sufficiently liberal to satisfy most liberals, is Trump derangement syndrome. Most Democrats and a lot of people in the news media were so furious at the thought that Donald Trump could win, they didn't want to risk an open primary. They were all in on the game. It was all a rigging for Joe Biden.